They said the ring was no place for broken boys. But Rubin Carter didn't care what they said. He didn't come to the fight game to be told where he belonged. He came because the world outside had already slammed its doors in his face. And the ring, with all its blood and noise, was the only place that didn't ask questions. Before he ever laced up gloves, Carter had scars the public couldn't see. Trouble came early, sharp and fast. Like the night he stabbed a man who tried to take something from him he could never get back. He was just a kid. They sent him to a juvenile reformatory, locked him up, and figured that was the end of him. But Rubin had a way of slipping past whatever cage they put him in. He escaped, ran straight into the arms of the U.S. Army. Germany was cold. The discipline was colder. But in those long, rough months overseas, he found boxing. Or maybe boxing found him. It was there, trading punches for pride, that something clicked. He didn't fight for glory. He fought like a man who had something to prove and something to forget. But Rubin couldn't run from himself forever. Trouble followed him home, and soon he was behind bars again, this time for robbery. It could have ended there. Another man might have stayed behind the walls. But when Carter walked out of prison in 1961, he didn't just walk out. He stepped into a ring and gave the world a reason to remember his name. He was smaller than most middleweights, but you wouldn't have known it from the way he fought. He came at you like a storm, wild, explosive, and fearless. Fans called him Hurricane, not because it sounded good, but because when he entered the ring, that's exactly what he brought. Fighters fell early and often. Big names, tough men. He knocked out contenders like Florentino Fernandez and George Benton. And suddenly, the boxing world couldn't ignore him. In 1963, he caught everyone off guard by dropping the great Emil Griffith twice in one round. By the end of that year, Carter wasn't just climbing. He was sprinting toward a title shot. And when he finally got his chance against champion Joey Giardello, he went for it with everything he had. But it wasn't enough. Giardello outlasted him. And just like that, the title slipped away. From there, the losses came more often. Fighters like Dick Tiger and Harry Scott showed him just how cruel the climb back could be. But Carter never backed down. Even when Tiger beat him so bad he called it the worst beating of his life, he stood until the final bell. His last fight came in 1966. No belt, no victory, just a man walking away from a game that never gave him what he was chasing. But Rubin Hurricane Carter left something behind. Not just knockouts or records, but a legacy of defiance. A fighter who came from nothing and punched his way into memory. The storm may have passed, but the wind he stirred never really settled. The streets were quiet that night. Just another summer's evening winding down in Paterson, New Jersey. But at 2:30 in the morning, everything changed. Shots rang out from inside the Lafayette Bar and Grill. When the smoke cleared, 3 people were dead and another lay bleeding, half blind and barely hanging on. Less than 15 minutes later, Rubin Carter's name was on the table. He wasn't found at the scene. He wasn't hiding, sweating, or covered in blood. He was in a car, coming back from a night out. Riding home, not running. The cops saw him, recognized him. Everyone knew who Hurricane Carter was, and let him go. But then came the whispers. Witnesses, shaky and unsure. A white car, maybe. 2 black men, probably. A butterfly-shaped tail light. Maybe not. Soon, the same cops were back on Carter's trail. This time, they didn't let him drive off. They brought him in. No gun, no blood, no powder burns. Just a bad feeling and a name too loud to ignore. Rubin Carter had been fighting all his life, in backyards, in bars, in the army, and in the ring. But nothing he faced prepared him for this. The weight of 3 murders, the stares, the silence, and a trial that felt more like a setup than a search for truth. The case leaned hard on 2 witnesses. Alfred Bello, a petty criminal with his own secrets, and Patricia Valentine, a woman who lived above the bar and claimed she saw 2 men from her window. Their stories changed, their memories blurred, and yet they pointed fingers. No weapon was ever found, no bullet matched, no blood, no prints, no trace of Carter or his friend John Artis inside that bar. Even lie detector tests were passed, and later, somehow not. The timeline didn't fit. The survivors never pointed to Carter. The grand jury said there wasn't enough. Still, the state pushed ahead. In a courtroom charged with doubt, Carter stood accused not by evidence, but by identity. A black man with a past, a fighter with a temper, a local name big enough to carry a case. They convicted him anyway. It took nearly 20 years of protests, of digging, of people who refused to let go, before the truth cracked through the lies. In 1985, a federal judge overturned the convictions, not because of new proof, but because the original trial was poisoned by racism, by politics, by the hunger to close a case. By then, Carter had spent nearly 2 decades behind bars for something he didn't do. They tried to bury him in silence, but his story refused to stay quiet. Rubin Carter didn't walk out of prison the same man, but he walked out. And when he did, the world finally listened. The second time around, the truth was already bruised. Months after the murders at the Lafayette bar, the story that had sent Rubin Carter and John Artis into a courtroom was starting to shift. The key witness, Alfred Bello, who once claimed to have just stumbled onto the crime scene, had some explaining to do. The police had discovered what he was really doing that night, acting as a lookout for a break-in, then slipping into the blood-soaked bar not for help, but for cash. With the pressure on and his secret out, Bello changed his tune. Now, he pointed directly at Artis. And then, like clockwork, Arthur Bradley stepped forward to complete the picture. Carter, he claimed, was the second gunman. Based on these new claims, and nothing more, the police pounced again. Carter and Artis were arrested. Bello later admitted he'd hoped for a $10,500 reward. He never got it, but the damage was done. And if that wasn't shaky enough, it got worse. The car Carter had been the night of the murders, already searched and cleared, was suddenly back in the story. Days after the arrests, a detective found 2 bullets in it, one from a shotgun, one from a .32 pistol, the exact types used in the killings. But the bullets didn't match the ones pulled from the victims. Different shells, different materials, different make. Still, the prosecution didn't flinch. They said it didn't matter. What mattered was the idea of a match, enough to stir suspicion. The trial became a performance. The evidence was shaky, the stories full of holes. The defense argued hard. Raymond A. Brown picked the eyewitness statements apart. He brought in people who swore Carter and Artis were at the night spot when the shots were fired. But none of it mattered. An all-white jury didn't see doubt. They saw 2 black men and 3 dead bodies. They found both guilty. Carter got 1 concurrent and 2 consecutive life sentences. Artis got 3 concurrent ones. They were locked away, but the cracks never stopped widening. In 1974, Bello and Bradley both took their stories back. They admitted their identifications were lies. The defense raced back to court with the recantations. But Judge Samuel Larner wasn't moved. He said the new stories didn't have the ring of truth. Carter stayed behind bars. Still, the story kept moving. Outside the prison walls, people began to listen, not just to the lies, but to the way the trial had been handled. George Lois, a sharp advertising mind, kicked off a campaign. It caught fire. Muhammad Ali gave his support. Bob Dylan wrote a song that spilled out of radios everywhere. It wasn't just about Carter. It was about how easily someone could be thrown away. During another hearing, more dirty details came to light. Tapes, promises, deals with witnesses that were never shared with the defense. Bello had made agreements that weren't disclosed. That alone, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled, was enough to throw out the original trial. The state had hidden the truth. A new trial was ordered. It was a second chance, but also a mess. The case was old. Witnesses had flipped, flopped, and blurred. But Prosecutor Burrell Humphreys pressed forward, trying not to repeat past mistakes. He had Bello take 2 lie detector tests. Both tests said he was telling the truth, at least the part where he saw Carter near the bar after the shootings. But then came a twist. One of the polygraph experts told Humphreys something off the record. Bello had also been inside the bar during the shootings. That detail destroyed the old version of his story, and yet it never showed up in the official report. The deeper anyone looked, the more broken the case became. Rubin Carter wasn't just a fighter in the ring. He was fighting a system that had tried to shut him down with lies, shifting stories, and forgotten evidence. And though the wheels of justice turned slow, painfully slow, they eventually turned his way. But by the time they did, nearly 20 years were gone. Years he couldn't get back. Years taken not by a fair fight, but by something much harder to beat. A lie dressed up as truth. The crowd had quieted down. The headlines had started to fade. But inside that cold courtroom in 1976, Rubin Hurricane Carter was back in the fight. Only this time, it wasn't with gloves. It was with every breath he had left. The same man, the same case, the same holes. Yet here they were again, dragging it all back to life. Alfred Bello took the stand once more. Just like in '67, he said he saw Carter and John Artis outside the Lafayette grill with guns. But this time, the jury already knew his story had once been different. He had taken it back, then changed it again. And the other man, Arthur Bradley, the one who had helped get Carter locked up in the first place, he stayed silent. Neither side called him. He didn't show up. The defense came with a fire of their own. Witness after witness said Carter was nowhere near the scene of the murders that night. Fred Hogan, the man who helped uncover the truth behind Bello and Bradley's old lies, stood up and told the court what he knew. He was asked point blank, "Did you bribe Bello?" Hogan said no. He handed over his original notes. No tricks, no bribes, just the truth, scribbled down line by line. They dug into Patricia Valentine's testimony, too, the woman who lived above the bar. Her story had shifted over the years, her descriptions no longer lining up with facts. And then there was William Aarons. He survived the shooting, only to die a few years later. His testimony from 1967 was read aloud. The attackers he described looked nothing like Carter or Artis. But the jury, once again, didn't flinch. Even when it came out that a prosecutor had allegedly tried to pressure a woman into testifying against Carter, it didn't stop the train. The prosecutor denied it. The jury listened. Then they left to talk it over. 9 hours later, they came back with the same verdict. Guilty. Same outcome. Same sentences. For Carter, 2 life terms. For Artis, 1. John Artis walked free on parole in 1981. Carter stayed locked in. His lawyers kept pushing. In 1982, they made it all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court. But it wasn't enough. The court admitted that the prosecution should have shared a key opinion from a lie detector expert, one that questioned Bello's whereabouts during the murders. Still, the majority said it wasn't a big enough deal to overturn the conviction. A 4-3 split. Close, but not justice. Around that same time, another crack appeared in the support Carter had built outside the courtroom. A bail bondswoman named Carolyn Kelly had helped raise money to get him a second trial. Then she said Carter had beaten her during a trip over an argument about a hotel bill. She didn't press charges. She said jail wasn't what he needed. Still, the headlines hurt. Public support began to fall away. A judge changed Carter's bail terms after hearing the details. It was another wound, another shadow hanging over a man already deep in the fight of his life. Even his marriage didn't survive. May Thelma, who had stood by him through the early years, left him after their second child was born. She found out he hadn't been faithful. That too slipped away. In the ring, Carter had once fought with speed and fury. But now, in courtrooms and lonely prison cells, the fight dragged on, slower, messier, and full of cracks that no one wanted to fix. Not yet, but the truth was still there, waiting. They tried to bury him with court papers. They tried to break him with cold steel bars and silent cells. But Rubin Carter kept swinging, even when the fight wasn't fair. By 1985, he had spent nearly 20 years behind bars for a crime he said he didn't commit. 2 trials, 2 guilty verdicts, and a justice system that had ignored every crack in its own foundation. But behind the scenes, his lawyers weren't done yet. They filed a petition in federal court, one last shot. Judge H. Lee Sarakin took that shot seriously. He didn't just look at the facts. He looked at the way the case had been built. And what he saw, a case shaped by hidden truths and racial bias. The judge called it for what it was. He threw out the convictions. Just like that, Carter, now 48 years old, walked out of prison, no bail, no cuffs. Free. The prosecutors weren't ready to let go. They appealed. They tried to get him locked back up while the case moved forward. The court said no. Then the appeals court sided with Sarakin, backing the decision without needing to repeat everything he'd said. The state still wasn't done. They went to the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. But the justices didn't take the case. So the door that opened for Carter stayed open. Now, prosecutors had a choice. They could try Carter and John Artis a third time. But even they knew the fight was over. Their key witness, Alfred Bello, couldn't be trusted anymore. Others were gone. And after 2 decades, the cracks in the case were too wide to fix. In 1988, the state dropped the charges for good. Carter didn't go back to the ring. He went north, to Canada. He lived with the people who had helped free him. But freedom didn't feel like freedom. He later said that place felt like another prison. He married Lisa Peters for a while, but said they never shared a bed. Still, he didn't disappear. Carter became a citizen. He stood up for others like him. For 12 years, he led a group that fought for the wrongly convicted. But he quit when the group wouldn't join him in speaking out against the promotion of a Canadian prosecutor tied to another wrongful conviction. Carter was done being quiet. He made headlines again in 1996, but for the wrong reason. Police in Toronto thought he was a drug dealer and arrested him. They were wrong. He was released. He kept speaking. Colleges gave him honorary law degrees. Awards followed, but cancer came next. In 2012, he said he had just a few months left to live. His old friend John Artis came to care for him. They had once faced life sentences together. Now, they were back under the same roof. Carter didn't just wait for the end. He kept fighting for another man, David McCallum, locked away in Brooklyn since the same year Carter had been freed. Even as cancer spread, Carter wrote his final plea in the New York Daily News, calling McCallum's conviction a mirror of his own. "I request only that McCallum be granted a full hearing," he wrote. "I am certain Thompson will recommend his immediate release." 2 months later, Carter died. He was 76. Later that same year, McCallum walked out of prison a free man. Rubin Carter's ashes were scattered in Cape Cod in Kentucky, far from the prison yards where he spent so many years. But pieces of him live on. Every time a wall falls, every time a man walks free. The storm had ended, but the echo of the hurricane never really faded. And that was the final chapter of Rubin, Hurricane Carter's long, painful, and powerful journey. A man who lost nearly 2 decades behind bars. Not because of what he did, but because of what the system refused to see. He could have disappeared after his release, could have let bitterness swallow him whole. But instead, he chose to fight, not with fists, but with purpose. He spent the rest of his life helping others trapped in the same nightmare he'd survived. In the end, the hurricane wasn't just a boxer, or a convict, or even a symbol. He was a man who refused to stay silent. A man who stood tall, even when the world tried to crush him. His legacy isn't just carved into courtroom records or newspaper pages. It's in every freed voice that was once silenced, every life pulled out of the shadows of injustice. Rubin Carter never got his championship belt in the ring, but in the fight for truth, he left a mark no one could erase.